Okay, hello. This is a little video with tips and tricks on running a virtual unconference. My name is Adam Mentor, and I'm here with Rachel Hartley, and we've been working on a project with the Autodesk Group Network called the Community Dojo, which is a bunch of tips for running groups and hosting events. And we ran a pretty successful unconference event as part of Autodesk University 2020. We had some great conversations during it, and we got some requests to share some practices on how to host that yourself, so that anybody out there can host a virtual unconference. So we're not going to explain like all the details of unconferences and open space technology. There's a lot of resources out there for that. So we're basically here just to have kind of an unscripted conversation and show and tell, to share our experience, both participating in and hosting these types of events. We'll tell you a little bit about the format, but not all the details. And we hope that it helps you host one of these events yourself if you are interested. Is there anything you want to add to that framing, Rachel, before we dive in?
No, I think it's going to be good to share the unconference. I know we have the template on the Community Dojo, so that'll be really helpful since we're not going into all of the details of the format. That is a great way to help you get started. And then, from AU 2020, what we experienced, we didn't just lead this in AMER and our English user groups, but we did lead it in Portuguese and Russian. And we saw success over that because of the engagement that it allowed peers and our group leaders to have with each other, especially when we're all still in this virtual format. It's more than just a Zoom meeting. And so it's a really nice refresher and a way to have really valuable discussions, dependent on any of the topics you're looking to discuss.
All righty. Well, I'm going to dive in. I'm going to share my screen. I have this neat little tool where you can see my video and my slides in the same thing here. Yeah, you can learn about that in the tools section of the Community Dojo. This is a new little tool called Stop my
what a great name.
Video here. Yeah. All right. So basically how we're going to run this is I have a bunch of tabs open that with stuff I just want to show y'all. So this is the deck, the slide deck that we use basically as the hosting space for the unconference at AU. And so this is the actual deck that we used, which after the fact, after the unconference, actually becomes sort of a artifact of like, here's the stuff that people wanted to talk about. And then here's the notes from all the different conversations that happened within here. But the reason I have this open is to just start the framing of like, what is an unconference? So whereas in a typical conference where there's, a presenter on a stage talking to a room of people, an unconference is a meeting in which the agenda is set by participants in real time. Anybody can propose a topic, and it leads to a fluid format that enables connection and emergence. It basically enables a bunch of breakouts to happen. So it's a very peer-to-peer. So this, you'll see here, this is how we framed the unconference here, is just that quick description. And then we sort of create the container for people to feel comfortable asking a question that's on their mind, proposing a topic that's on their mind, and then we give them space to do that. And there's lots and lots and lots of resources on unconferences on the internet. And I actually don't want to dive directly into all of that right now. We're assuming that you kind of know some of the basics. There's, certain key principles of unconferences and the law of 2 feet, and all these things are really well described. And we're going to post links to all of these pages and resources that we're sharing in this meeting in the YouTube video when we post this. So here's a page on unconferences in Wikipedia. An unconference is a participant-driven meeting, like we just talked about. So you see things like this, where it's like, here's a time slot, here's a location, here's a topic that's generated by a bunch of people. And they might say, hey, I want to talk about starting a new group. That was, one of the topics that we talked about at Autodesk University. And so here's, and there's departure points for all different sort of related facilitation techniques. Like a fishbowl is a way often after an unconference set of conversations have happened, a fishbowl is a way to debrief at the end. So again, tons and tons of resources out there. Here's another one, Open Space World. So open space technology is sort of the fancy word for unconference, or it's one of the original framings of it. And so here's some of the original writings. I think it's from the early 90s. Harrison Owen is the person that sort of wrote the first white papers on this practice. There's here's 10 simple rules for organizing an unconference. Hold on. All right. And so the Community Dojo is a place where, we basically put these tips and tricks out there for people that are trying to facilitate these events and host groups. So there's a little section here on unconferences where you'll see we've templatized that document that we use for AU 2020, and we're going to go through it a bit later in this call. So you can access the template there. You can get some of those very basic best links, but just Googling any of this stuff will give you all sorts of tips and tricks. Okay, I'll close these, done with that. So I want to talk a little bit about why this is a really compelling format. Rachel talked a little bit about this, like in the experience with some of the Russian groups, saying that, hey, this is a format where we're able to talk with each other at this time when we're not able to kind of meet up in person like we normally would, and we're all have Zoom fatigue. This is kind of a way of having more detailed conversations in breakouts based on what we actually want to talk about. So a friend of mine who is unfortunately now deceased is named Jay Cross, and he was one of the people that came up with the concept and the discipline of informal learning within people that were doing instructional design. And one of the things that, one of a quote, like, so, he's got books. Informal Learning is a book that is good and that he wrote. This is just an interview with him, but really what I wanted to say is he had this quote that I love, is that conversation is the stem cell of learning. And so really what unconferences do is it's an environment where conversations can really flourish. And so a lot of learning can happen. And another person who's kind of a really interesting thinker on community that I wanted to surface is David J. He's got a lot of really interesting writing on Medium. And he talks a lot about relationality, which is basically through these conversations, what happens is that relationships form. And those relationships are key to learning, but they're also key to a bunch of other stuff like innovation and accomplishing work together and just sort of like fulfillment and meaning and belonging. And that an unconference, which is basically enough structure to help people get into the best conversation for them possible so that they can meet the people that are the most fruitful for where they are. And so oftentimes at conferences, you might sit through an hour-long presentation waiting for that 5-minute, snippet that's really useful for you. And you're not actually really even engaging. You're just kind of like you're just sort of consuming information. Here you can choose to sort of sit back and listen, but you can also jump in and you can, people are learning from each other and learning from each other's experience in this process. Let's see. Yeah, I think that's pretty much what I wanted to say just to frame unconferences and why they're important. I wanted to talk a little bit about my own experience hosting unconferences. So I've been hosting unconferences for over a decade, and it was actually in person is where I first was doing this. And in sort of there's an event called the Greener Mind Summit, which is this kind of party and conference up in the Redwoods. And we, here's a session that was all about like how to build a chair. So, and here's a session on biochar. And I'm not sure what this session was about. So you can see these sessions can take different formats, and different people come with different things to talk about, whether it's sharing something that they're an expert in the case of biochar here, or just talking about an idea that's important. So after that experience of hosting this stuff in person, and part of what was really powerful about this is it's not just, a way to convey information. Like, these relationships actually formed a community. So Greener Mind, it started just as an event, but it 10 years on, it's actually a community now. And if it wasn't for that format of unconferences, like, that would never really have happened. So when COVID hit, nobody's able to meet in person. So Greener Mind actually ended up getting canceled. But one of the things that some folks at Greener Mind did was hosted a virtual unconference at one point. And it was like, oh, wow, you can do that just on a screen through Zoom, et cetera. And when Rachel and I hosted the event at AU, we basically we riffed off of that original template that Greener Mind folks had created. But sort of anchoring a little bit to what we talk about in the Community Dojo in terms of hosting events. So, there's a bunch of prep work that you do for an event, and then the event itself happens, and the event has a beginning, a middle, and an end. Really, the unconference is it's a wonderful format if you have a lot of space within an event. So say you're doing a full day event, like a work session, even a work session for your team, or a half day event. I think the unconference that we did at AU was an hour and a half. I think if it had been any shorter, we wouldn't really have been able to use that format. So at Greener Mind, the way it works is, and with these like larger conferences, is that you often have sort of warm-up activities as a full group to kind of coalesce. And then the unconference is what happens in the middle, where, like we talk about here in the middle, it's like the middle is where the magic can happen. Once people are together and oriented, you can help the group do what it came here to do. And really, unconference is a format that can do that. And then you can kind of come back together after the unconference. So at other conferences, this might be, a plenary or a keynote, et cetera. Like, you can think about Autodesk University, actually, like, there's the plenary. A lot of times, like, all the different individual classes that you go to is the middle part. And then at the end is, a party or whatever. Within the confines of an unconference, like, it ends up being, if the bounds of this event is just an unconference, this beginning part is basically setting the topics and aligning on what you're there to do, and kind of saying, like, what's the mission, who are the people here, that sort of thing. These are the breakouts, and then this at the end is the share outs. So you could just within, can have unconferences just within that structure. So let's see,
So Adam, I have a question for you.
Yeah.
What have you noticed as, you've been on, I think, the participative side of an unconference, and then also been on the hosting side. So can you share a bit about kind of the nature of, like, what are some of your tips to, like, successfully host as the hoster, and then as being a participant, kind of some of those differences there? Like, do you see maybe pros or cons, or just tips that you have for both sides of those?
Yeah, in terms of being a host, I think sort of creating a container that people feel is creative and fun, and like, not too fast, if that makes sense. So it's like, we're here together, we are here as people together, and we are here to learn from each other and share with each other. And sort of setting that tone just through how you talk and how you pace things is really important. So even in what we did at AU, like, when people first arrived, for example, we had this fun little video that we shared. Instead of just kind of sitting there with dead air at the beginning, we had this funny parody of a Star Wars video that just took 3 minutes, but it sets the tone of like, hey, like this is fun. We're here to have fun together, and this is going to be a little different, I guess. So that's one thing in terms of hosting. And we'll get into some more tips for hosting. I want to sort of go through the template a little bit in the next bit of what we'll share here. In terms of participating, one of the principles of unconferences is the law of 2 feet, which is basically if you're not either learning or contributing in a conversation, go somewhere else. So having the courage to do that is an important thing. And then for me as a participant, one of the most important things, like even as you're going into an unconference, is to take a minute to reflect on what it is you're coming there to do or learn, and just sort of think about that. And in some cases for me, it's like, I just want a broad overview of what people are thinking and what the kind of work that people are doing in this space or something. And if that's the case, then what I end up doing is floating between a lot of conversations. There's a concept in in Unconference, which I think is either the bumblebee or the butterfly. Actually, I don't quite remember, but it's like the person that goes between conversations and actually can help seed ideas between conversations. So sometimes I end up playing that role. Sometimes as the host, if you're the only host, it's really hard to propose a conversation because you're also sort of keeping time and checking in with people. So as the host, it's really important that you're sort of attuned to the group and listening to the group and holding the space for the group. And so at AU, like I was in this role, I was both the host and I proposed a topic, but I wouldn't have been able to do that unless we had facilitation support. So you, like Rachel, you were there to kind of help make sure people were getting into rooms and getting in and out of rooms. And that freed me up to actually host a conversation, because that was a scenario in which I was less interested in like what's happening overall, and I was interested more in a deep dive conversation. So I proposed a topic as well, and that,
yeah. So if I can
those are
recap
some of
a
the
bit,
things that come to my mind.
Yeah, it just sounds like one, hosting, like it is good to have multiple sometimes, especially if you want to be like able to participate a bit in the discussions. But also as a participant, it's pretty neat that you don't have to be bound to the one conversation that you're in, and that you have the opportunity to, float from multiple conversations if you're there to just really take that overall absorption and learning instead of a deep dive into one topic.
Yep.
Cool. Thanks.
So if you want to host an event like this virtually, we hope that so we took the deck that we did here from AU and we templatized it. And basically what that means is, we preserved a lot of the, even just like speaker notes and stuff. But what we added in some cases was a bit more detailed than speaker notes, but also these like little yellow boxes that's just like, some orientation and tips along the way. So we talked about starting with that fun video. It's like, get folks in a creative, generative, and relaxed mood, set the tone. So you'll see little tips like that throughout that will hopefully help you use this as a template if you're interested in doing that. Google Documents is a really great tool because it, allows multiple people to be in there at the same time, be editing. And then when you have documents, like this is an interesting, hosting this stuff virtually is really interesting. Cause like when we're in a conference center or in a room, you kind of have a space, where you're taking notes often by hand to help the conversation move forward. This document is both like a notes document and also part of the space that people are convening within. So you can see like we did some interactive activities here with the Google Slides. And then, you know, instead of having a wall that people are looking at and posting ideas and post-its on, we had these slides, which effectively were the wall where people were posting their ideas. And then we then created a schedule from that. And so it's interesting that this, like, these documents plus your meeting technology forms the space that people are actually, in a way, physically inhabiting together in this virtual way.
Yeah, and Adam, if I can add in there, just for clarification a bit, we use this template as one, like that presentation, to help people get acquainted with the Unconference, but then it's shared so that it's editable by everyone, and so that everyone received the link, and that's how they started to dive into it. So instead of just posting in the chat, like, hey, I'm based in Texas or I'm based in the UK, plop a pin there for me, they actually have the ability to be engaging with the slides itself. So it gives everyone that opportunity to be editing in the slides, just as if you were in that physical space together, like Adam mentioned.
Yeah, so I think it's actually kind of useful to look back at this diagram. So in this opening bit here, you know, we did basic intros. We had some sort of an activity where people got to sort of see and know who else was there. In this case, you kind of plopped pins there. It had basically, you know, initial framing on the day, like, and the topic, a bit of history. And then this part is that creating the container part, where you sort of have norms and then align on goals, and then talk about what actually unconferences, how they work for people that have never experienced it before. And so all this stuff is like stuff that you do before you get to the main breakouts, and the main breakouts is where most of the value happens. So it's a bit of a tension. You want to, if you have a big mixed group, it's important to go through some of this so that so that everybody is kind of coming at it with the same starting point and knows what to expect. But you also don't want to dwell on this too much, because the magic happens once you get people here into actually talking about what they want to talk about. And the first part of that is actually having anybody sort of write down and reflect what they want to talk about. And after you give people a minute to do that, it's actually really important, instead of just putting those ideas up on the wall and just letting people read it, it's actually really important to pause and let everybody vocalize what they want to talk about. That's part of how the group gets to know each other. And those types of introductions to topics also can create more conversations and connections afterwards, even if a certain topic doesn't even get discussed. Like, we never talked about creating a leadership council for the group network, for example, at AU, but just knowing that is a topic, and that that it's something that people can talk with me about, and I know that there's one other person who's interested in that now based on, you know, who voted for it, is valuable. In these virtual sessions, it's the hard part and the art is creating the breakout rooms, and we'll talk a bit more about that right now, I guess, actually. And this was where Rachel was instrumental in the facilitation. So, you know, oftentimes what happens in these physical events is that you put voting dots up and you sort of figure out if you have certain, like a big space or a small space, the topic with the biggest, you know, most votes might get the big space, et cetera. So you as a facilitator are basically creating the space and the time for things to happen. And so what we did, instead of doing like little voting dots here, is that we took the topics that people had proposed, and then we clustered them as we were doing it, and then we put it on here where people could kind of vote, and then we use this as the list where we could create Zoom breakout rooms. Rachel, do you want to talk a little bit about the process of creating the Zoom breakout rooms?
Yeah, definitely. In creating the Zoom breakout room, so we let everyone have a 5-minute break. So we tried to fit this in 5 minutes. And what Adam did was looked at what everyone on this page that you're seeing right now, you had the topic in the white card, and you had what everyone's first and second choices were on the topic that they would want to have a breakout discussion on. So from there, Adam worked to say, okay, these are our 4 topics that we're going to have in the discussions. So in Zoom breakout, I made those as 4 individual breakout rooms. And then Adam let me know, based off choices, who was going to be going into each of the rooms talking on each of the topics. So as you'll see here, Adam was typing in and putting everyone's names there, and I would work from that list to then assign each of those individual people in the Zoom to those breakout rooms. And then once we were ready for everyone to go to those breakout rooms, I would open them. But working together to kind of have Adam seeing what topics are gaining the most interest so that we could have those 4 rooms, and then also seeing, based off how they voted on first or second choice, which room that they should be going to. And then I could just quickly do the magic on the Zoom breakout side and assign people there accordingly. And, it's important that, this is what, like Adam said, and the law of 2 feet, and how you can kind of float around if you want. You don't have to be bound to this room that you are assigned to. So let's say you had battling first choices. You could be in the discussion for a bit and then exit that Zoom room, which I was waiting in the lounge in that original Zoom space, and just let that person know, I want to be moved to room 2. I want to talk about CAD management, and then I would assign you into that room 2. So you still have that flexibility to move around, even from what your initial first assignment might be.
Yeah, so in that case, having sort of the host with the moderator permissions in a lounge space was important, because it can help people wayfind within the different breakouts. There's actually a way to do it even more flexibly with Zoom. There's this fun article on how to host a cocktail party on Zoom and have better conferences too, where if you know everybody who's involved, like if you have a group and the 15 people coming or whatever, you can make everybody a host and then they can move themselves. But we didn't do that for AU, but you can do it. And there's also other, now that we're into COVID a certain amount, there's other virtual meeting technology platforms that are coming up and innovating. So one that I've heard a lot about, but I haven't actually used yet, is AirMeet. So I think that there's more native tools for doing breakouts within AirMeet. This is a tool actually that I came across a few weeks back, Kiko Chat, that has been around for a long time actually, and is sort of purpose built for doing breakouts. It's not super intuitive to set up, so but it does seem like if you're serious about doing a big event like this or hosting a conference and you have the patience to set it up, it has some really powerful tools for creating like shared artifacts together in the breakout rooms. And so what we did at AU was we had just these slides here as part of the same document as conversation notes. So that's one of the nice things as well about unconferences, is usually after these individual breakouts where people are talking, there's some forum for coming back together and sharing. And there's also oftentimes artifacts that are created in those conversations that help the share out. So in this virtual format, all that stuff is all just together here. So here's all the conversation notes from the time that we had together, and you can see like what's the next step. Are there next steps? Sometimes there's actually actions and projects or movements or follow-ups, or a lot of times what's shared is resources, so like links and stuff like that. All that stuff is just all captured right here for us. So I think that more or less covers what we have as the template here. We hope that you can just pick this up and use it. Another great thing about Google Docs is that you can, I think we have it right here. You can create a copy of this for yourself and just work from it and adapt it to your own needs. A couple of things I wanted to say just sort of on that topic that Rachel asked in terms of tips and tricks as a participant and as a host. One is, sometimes you think like the conversations have to have a lot of people in them to be valuable, but that's not the case at all, actually. So there's a bit of a tension sometimes as a host. You're like, okay, am I going to allow there to be space for this topic that just 3 people are interested in? And we've gone back and forth on how to do this in the Greener Mind community. And I think in general, I fall on the camp of like, let there be space for whatever people want there to be space for. And it's harder if you're on Zoom and you have, it'd be hard for Rachel to create 12 different breakout rooms in a 90-minute meeting. We had 4 spaces, but but one of those meetings actually ended up being just a conversation between 2 people. And that was the one that I was in, was on movements and causes. And it was just 2 people. And that was actually the perfect conversation for me to have in that meeting. And we were able to, dive in just because, that one of the principles is whoever comes are the right people. And I think that was the case in here. Another thing as a host is like, nominally this unconference that we hosted was about leading community, leading groups, hosting events, the stuff that the Community Dojo is about and that the Autodesk Group Network is about. But we had some people there, and a fair number of people, who wanted to talk about the practice of CAD management, which really wasn't necessarily something that we had planned to hold the space for, but again, like that's what they wanted to talk about. And so we created that room for them to have that conversation because, hopefully these folks, if they may not have been interested in, if they had joined the movements and causes, for example, and weren't really interested in it, they would have just created dead weight in that conversation, whereas they actually were able to find the conversation that was most relevant to them. Yeah, I'm trying to think. I had a few notes here. I think we covered most of the stuff I wanted to talk about. One other thing that's sort of become a little bit of a mantra as I host these types of events is like, don't be afraid to move the furniture. So when you host this stuff in physical spaces, it's like you come to a conference center and like all the tables are in rounds or all the tables are in a certain way. And it's like, when you create, part of what's revolutionary about creating this type of a meeting is that you can form it to whatever needs to happen. So just be flexible and don't be afraid to move the furniture. And in this case, that might mean like, hey, we're going to move this slide from here to here, or we're going to scrap what we were going to do here and configure it differently. But that's one tip that I have. Yeah, and if you have, one of the things that I think is unique about this Community Dojo project is that we're building this resource as we go, sort of as you just saw. So we are creating artifacts to help community as we are operating in community. And there's also ways to submit questions. So if you have questions or feedbacks or thoughts or things that you'd like to ask or add, you can fill that out here. Click on the link in the dojo. If you end up using this template and then you create a better version of the template, we can add it here too. So that's another thing that I would say, and that's also sort of in the spirit of these types of meetings and unconferences, is everything's in motion, everything's a work in progress, and we're always trying to get better, and we're always working together to do that. So that is what I had basically to share. Is there anything, Rachel, that you wanted to add at the end, or any final questions you wanted to get in there?
No, I think just what I'm excited for is, like you said, when you have to spend, it's that tension of setting the stage of like getting acquainted with the principles and how it operates. What I'm excited for is the more that we do this within the group network and with our leaders and other users, that we're getting more comfortable with it and we already know it. So then we can just really dive into setting the topics and getting into that conversation. So I think the more that you test and the more that you do it, the more that people are familiar with it, and then you can really get to those discussions. So excited to see your success with testing these unconferences, and really excited in the group network to continue with this format in our future meetups.
Awesome. All right, well, we'll sign off for now. And again, we'll post the links to all of those tabs that I had open in this sort of show and tell in wherever we post this. So bye for now.
All right.